The Winchester rifle felt heavy in Abigail's trembling hands as she watched the dust cloud grow larger on the horizon. 6 riders approaching her isolated homestead with the dying afternoon sun behind them. She positioned herself behind the water trough, her pregnant belly making it difficult to crouch low, and she steadied the barrel across the weathered wood as her heart hammered against her ribs. It had been 3 months since they buried Thomas in the rocky ground behind the barn. 3 months since the fever took him and left her alone with nothing but this struggling ranch outside Bonanza, Colorado, and a baby growing inside her that would never know its father. The riders came closer, and Abigail could make out their silhouettes against the September sky of 1882. 5 of them rode with the confidence of men who owned whatever land their horses touched, sitting tall in their saddles with rifles visible on every mount. But the 6th rider, the one slightly ahead of the others, suddenly pulled his horse to a stop about 50 yards from the house. His hands rose slowly, and then he did something that made Abigail's breath catch in her throat. He dropped his reins completely, letting them fall against his horse's neck, his palms open and facing her in a gesture of complete surrender. "Madam," his voice carried across the distance, deep and steady, "we don't mean you any harm. My name is William Ashford, and these men ride for the Triple Creek Ranch. We're tracking 3 horses that were stolen from our corrals 2 nights ago, and their tracks led us this direction." Abigail kept the rifle trained on him, though something in his voice made her finger relax slightly on the trigger. "I haven't seen any horses except my own 2 in the barn, and they've been here all week." William Ashford shifted in his saddle but kept his hands visible. He was a tall man. She could see that even mounted, with broad shoulders beneath a worn leather vest and a face shadowed by his hat. "Would you mind if I dismounted and we talked properly? It's hard to have a conversation when a lady's got a Winchester pointed at my chest." "You can dismount," Abigail called back, "but your friends stay mounted and stay right where they are." She watched him swing down from his horse with an easy grace, his movements slow and deliberate. As he walked closer, removing his hat, she got her first clear look at him. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and eyes that were a surprising shade of gray-blue. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and there was nothing threatening in his expression, only a kind of patient concern. "That's far enough," Abigail said when he was about 20 feet away. "You said you're tracking stolen horses." "Yes, madam. 3 mares, all branded with the Triple Creek mark. Fine animals worth a good deal of money. The tracks we followed split off about a mile back, but one set came this way." He paused, his eyes taking in the state of the ranch, the sagging fence posts, the barn that needed repair, the garden that was struggling despite obvious care. "Are you out here alone?" "That's none of your concern," Abigail said, though her voice wavered slightly. "Check the barn if you want. You'll see I've only got my 2 horses and an old mule." William looked at her for a long moment, and Abigail felt suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. She knew her dress was faded and patched, that her blonde hair was escaping its pins, that her condition was obvious despite her efforts to conceal it beneath Thomas's old work shirt. But there was no judgment in William's gaze, only something that looked almost like worry. "I believe you, madam," he said quietly. "But I'm more concerned about whether you're all right out here. This is rough country and it's getting rougher. There's been talk of gangs operating in these parts, men who wouldn't hesitate to take advantage of an isolated homestead." "I can take care of myself," Abigail said, lifting her chin. "As you can see." A slight smile touched William's lips. "I can see that. You handle that Winchester like you know how to use it, but handling a rifle and managing a ranch alone while carrying a child are 2 different things." He held up a hand when she started to protest. "I'm not trying to offend you. I'm trying to offer help if you need it." "I don't need charity," Abigail said sharply, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't entirely true. She needed so many things she didn't know where to begin, and pride was a poor substitute for the practical help that Thomas would have provided if he'd lived. "Not charity," William said. "Neighborliness. The Triple Creek Ranch is about 8 miles northeast of here. My boss, Marcus Brennan, he's a fair man, and we've got more hands than we strictly need right now. I could send a couple of boys over to help with some of the heavier work, mending fences, fixing that barn roof before winter comes. No obligation, no payment necessary." Behind him, one of the other riders called out, "Will, we're losing daylight. Those horses could be halfway to Denver by now." William didn't turn around. "Give me a minute, Jake." His eyes remained on Abigail. "What do you say, madam? Can I at least know your name?" Abigail hesitated, then slowly lowered the rifle. "Abigail Kensington. My husband Thomas and I claimed this land 2 years ago. He passed in June." "I'm sorry for your loss," William said, and the sincerity in his voice made Abigail's eyes sting with unexpected tears. She'd heard those words dozens of times from the few neighbors who'd come to pay their respects, but somehow William's quiet sympathy felt different, more genuine. "Thank you," she managed. "And I appreciate the offer, Mr. Ashford, but I really don't need. When's the baby due?" He asked gently, interrupting her refusal. "January," Abigail admitted. "Mid-January, the doctor in town thinks." William nodded slowly. "That's 4 months away. 4 months of work that needs doing before the snow comes. Mrs. Kensington, I can see you're a proud woman, and I respect that. But pride won't keep you warm when that barn roof caves in under the weight of a Colorado winter, and it won't feed your child come spring. Let me help. Not because you're weak, but because everyone needs help sometimes, and it's the right thing to do." Abigail felt something crack in her chest. The wall she'd built around herself since Thomas died developing its first fissure. She was so tired. Tired of pretending she could manage everything alone. Tired of lying awake at night calculating how many more months the money would last. Tired of the fear that sat like a stone in her stomach every time she thought about giving birth with no one nearby to help. "I can't pay you," she said quietly. "I didn't ask for payment." William took a step closer, his expression earnest. "I'll come by tomorrow after my work at the ranch is done, bring some tools and supplies. We'll start with that barn roof. Is that agreeable, Will?" The call came more urgently now. "We really need to move." William finally turned. "Go on ahead, Jake. Follow the tracks north. I'll catch up with you later." "You're not coming?" one of the other riders asked, surprise evident in his voice. "I'll follow when I'm done here," William said firmly. "Those tracks are clear enough. You don't need me to track 3 horses across open prairie." There was some grumbling, but the 5 riders eventually turned their horses and continued north, leaving William standing in Abigail's yard with his hat in his hands. The gesture of staying behind, of choosing to help her rather than chase valuable horses, left Abigail momentarily speechless. "You didn't have to do that," she finally said. "Those horses are worth a lot of money, you said." "They are," William agreed, "but the boys can handle it. And honestly, Mrs. Kensington, I can't in good conscience ride away knowing you're out here struggling alone. It wouldn't sit right with me." He walked back to his horse and retrieved a canteen from his saddle, then returned and offered it to her. "You must be thirsty, standing in the sun like that." Abigail realized she was parched. She'd been working in the garden all afternoon before she spotted the riders, and in her alarm, she'd forgotten about everything except defending her property. She accepted the canteen with a murmured thanks and drank deeply, the water cool and refreshing. "Let me look at that barn," William said, already heading toward the structure without waiting for permission. "I want to see what we're dealing with." Abigail followed him, irritated by his presumption but also oddly relieved to have someone else take charge, even temporarily. William examined the barn with the practiced eye of someone who understood construction and livestock, running his hands along the support beams, studying the roof where several shingles had blown away in a storm last month. "The foundation is solid," he said after a thorough inspection. "That's good. Your husband built this well, but you've got rot in some of these boards and the roof definitely needs work before the first snow. The corral fence is in bad shape too." "I know," Abigail said, defensive again. "I've been doing what I can, but some jobs require more strength than I have right now." William turned to her, and his expression was kind. "You've been doing an impressive job, Mrs. Kensington. Most women in your situation would have given up and headed back east by now. But there's a difference between giving up and accepting help." He checked the position of the sun, now sinking toward the mountains in the west. "It's getting late. I should let you get back to your evening chores, but I meant what I said. I'll be back tomorrow with supplies." "Is there anything specific you need from town? I'm planning to stop at the general store." Abigail wanted to say no, wanted to maintain her independence, but practicality won out. "Flour, if it's not too much trouble, and lamp oil. I'm running low on both. Consider it done." William mounted his horse in one smooth motion. "Lock your doors tonight, Mrs. Kensington, and keep that Winchester close. I meant what I said about gangs in the area. There was a robbery in Leadville last week and the men responsible are still at large." "I always lock my doors," Abigail said. "And I sleep with the rifle next to my bed." "Good." William settled his hat back on his head. "I'll see you tomorrow evening then, and Mrs. Kensington, thank you for not shooting me today. I've grown rather fond of being alive." Despite herself, Abigail felt a smile tug at her lips. "The day's not over yet, Mr. Ashford." His laugh was warm and genuine as he turned his horse toward the north, following the path his companions had taken. Abigail watched him ride away until he was just a dark speck against the vast landscape, then turned back to her house feeling strangely lighter than she had in months. That night, she did lock her doors as always, but for the first time since Thomas died, she didn't feel quite so alone. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, her hand resting on her swollen belly where the baby kicked and rolled, and allowed herself to think about William Ashford's gray-blue eyes and the quiet strength in his voice. It felt disloyal somehow, thinking about another man when Thomas had been gone such a short time, but she pushed the guilt aside. William was offering help, nothing more. There was no harm in accepting it, and certainly no harm in acknowledging that he seemed like a good man. The baby gave a particularly strong kick, and Abigail smiled despite her exhaustion. "Your father would have liked him, I think," she whispered to her unborn child. "He always said the measure of a man was in his willingness to help someone who couldn't repay the favor." She slept better that night than she had in weeks, though she couldn't entirely say why. True to his word, William arrived the following evening just as the sun was beginning to set. Abigail heard the wagon before she saw it, and when she stepped out onto the porch, she was surprised to see not just William on horseback but a full wagon driven by a young man who looked barely 18, the bed loaded with lumber, shingles, and various tools. "Mrs. Kensington," William greeted her, dismounting. "I hope you don't mind, but I brought my friend Danny along to help. We'll get more done with 2 sets of hands." Danny tipped his hat to her, his face open and friendly. "Madam." Will here wouldn't stop talking about the work that needed doing, so I figured I'd better come along and help or listen to him fret about it for weeks. "I wasn't fretting," William said mildly, but there was a hint of color in his cheeks. "I was planning." Abigail found herself smiling. "Well, I appreciate both of you coming, though this is far more supplies than I expected." "Mr. Brennan sends his regards," William said, unloading his horse. "When I told him about your situation, he insisted on providing the materials. He lost his wife a few years back, knows what it's like to be alone. He said to tell you that neighbors take care of neighbors in Colorado, and there's no shame in accepting help when it's freely given." Abigail felt her throat tighten with emotion. She'd been so focused on maintaining her independence that she'd forgotten how good it felt to be part of a community, to have people who cared. "That's very generous. Please thank Mr. Brennan for me." "You can thank him yourself when you meet him," William said. "He's invited you to dinner at the ranch house next Sunday after church, if you're willing to make the trip." Before Abigail could respond, Danny called out from the wagon, "Will, where do you want these shingles?" The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity. William and Danny worked with efficient coordination, clearly accustomed to laboring together. They started on the barn roof, replacing the damaged shingles and reinforcing the weak spots. Abigail tried to help where she could, but William insisted she stay on the ground, bringing them tools and water but doing nothing that might risk a fall. As darkness began to fall, William climbed down from the roof and surveyed their progress with satisfaction. "We'll need at least 2 more evenings to finish this properly, but the worst of the holes are patched. You shouldn't have to worry about rain getting in." "I don't know how to thank you," Abigail said, meaning it sincerely. "You've done more in 2 hours than I could have managed in 2 months. Danny was loading tools back into the wagon, and William drew Abigail aside, his voice low. "There's something I need to tell you. When I caught up with the boys yesterday, we found the stolen horses about 10 miles north of here. But we also found tracks suggesting the thieves might have scouted your property. There were boot prints near your southern fence line, and they were fresh." Abigail felt her stomach drop. "You think they were planning to rob me?" "I don't know," William admitted, "but I don't like it. Those prints were from 2, maybe 3 men on foot. They walked the perimeter of your property like they were looking for something. Should I report it to the sheriff in town?" "Already did this morning. Sheriff Morrison said he'd send a deputy out to check on you periodically, but he's got limited men and a lot of territory to cover." William hesitated, then said, "Mrs. Kensington, I know this is forward of me, but would you consider letting me camp out here for a few nights? Just until we're sure there's no threat. I could sleep in the barn, wouldn't be any trouble." "Mr. Ashford, that's not necessary," Abigail started, but William interrupted her gently. "Please call me William, and it is necessary at least to my peace of mind. I won't be able to sleep anyway, worrying about whether you're safe out here." Abigail studied his face in the fading light. There was genuine concern there, nothing improper or presumptuous. "William," she said carefully, "you understand that people might talk if you're staying here." "Let them talk," William said simply. "Your safety is more important than gossip, and anyone who knows me knows I'm not the kind of man who would take advantage of a widow in your condition. My mother raised me better than that." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Abigail felt warmth spread through her chest. "All right," she agreed. "You can stay in the barn, but I insist on providing meals while you're here. It's the least I can do." William's smile was like sunrise. "That's a deal I'm happy to accept. Your cooking has to be better than the grub we get at the bunkhouse." Danny had finished loading the wagon and now approached them. "I'll head back to the ranch and let Mr. Brennan know you're staying. Will, want me to bring you some clothes and gear tomorrow, please? And my bedroll. Tell Marcus I'll be back to work my regular shifts, but I'll be spending nights here for a while." After Danny left, Abigail led William into the house, suddenly self-conscious about the simple state of her home. It was clean but sparse, with few comforts. The furniture was handmade, rough but serviceable, and the walls were bare except for a single photograph of her and Thomas on their wedding day. "I was about to make dinner," she said. "It's nothing fancy, just stew from yesterday and fresh biscuits, but you're welcome to join me." "That sounds perfect," William said, removing his hat and hanging it on the peg by the door. "Can I wash up somewhere?" Abigail showed him to the basin on the back porch, then returned to the kitchen to finish preparing the meal. As she worked, she was acutely aware of William's presence in her home, the first man besides Thomas to sit at her table. It felt strange and intimate and slightly frightening all at once. They ate in surprisingly comfortable silence at first, both hungry from the day's work. Then William said, "Tell me about your husband if it's not too painful. How did you two end up in Colorado?" Abigail set down her spoon, gathering her thoughts. "We met in Missouri, in a little town outside Kansas City. Thomas worked for my father, who owned a dry goods store. He was saving money to start his own ranch, had dreams of the West and wide open spaces. When he asked me to marry him, he was honest about what the life would be like. He said it would be hard and lonely sometimes, but we'd build something together, something that would last." "Sounds like a good man," William said quietly. "He was," Abigail agreed, surprised to find she could talk about Thomas without the crushing weight of grief that usually accompanied his memory. "He was patient and kind and stubborn as a mule when he set his mind to something. We had 2 good years here, building the ranch up from nothing. And then last spring, he caught a fever while helping a neighbor deliver a calf in the rain. It turned to pneumonia, and within a week, he was gone." William reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the gesture brief but comforting. "I'm sorry, Abigail. That's a hard thing to bear, especially with a baby on the way." She realized he'd used her first name and she'd used his earlier, and somehow the familiarity didn't feel wrong. "What about you?" she asked. "How did you end up working for the Triple Creek Ranch?" "I came out from Ohio 5 years ago," William said, sitting back in his chair. "My father owned a small farm, but I was the youngest of 4 sons, and there wasn't enough land to divide between us all. I figured I'd head west and make my own way. Worked odd jobs for a while, cowboying mostly, until I landed at Triple Creek. Mr. Brennan gave me a chance when a lot of other ranchers wouldn't. Saw something in me, I guess. I've been there ever since. Do you ever think about having your own place?" Abigail asked. "All the time," William admitted. "I've been saving my wages, learning everything I can about running a ranch properly. Someday, I'd like to have land of my own, raise cattle and horses, maybe start a family." He paused, then added, "But I've learned that timing is everything. A ranch is too much for one person to handle alone. You need a partner, someone who shares the dream and is willing to work just as hard to make it real." They talked late into the evening, the conversation flowing easily from one topic to another. William told her about life on the Triple Creek, about the other cowboys and their various quirks, about the challenges of ranching in Colorado's unpredictable climate. Abigail found herself laughing for the first time in months, genuinely enjoying another person's company. When William finally excused himself to sleep in the barn, Abigail cleaned up the dishes with a strange lightness in her chest. She checked the locks on the doors, loaded the Winchester and placed it by her bed as always. But for the first time since Thomas died, she didn't feel afraid of the darkness outside her windows. The next week fell into an easy rhythm. William would work his regular shifts at the Triple Creek during the day, then ride to Abigail's homestead in the evening. He and Danny, who came whenever he could spare the time, made steady progress on the repairs. They fixed the barn roof, mended the corral fences, replaced rotting boards in the porch, and even started work on expanding the chicken coop. Every evening, Abigail would prepare dinner for whoever was working, and afterward, she and William would sit on the porch and talk while the sun set. She learned that he'd never known his mother, who died when he was born, and that his father had raised 4 boys alone with a combination of hard work and harder love. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her mother's death when she was 12, and how she'd taken over running her father's household, learning to cook and manage a home while other girls were still playing with dolls. On Sunday, William arrived mid-morning in a clean shirt and his best vest to escort Abigail to church and then to dinner at the Triple Creek Ranch. She'd been nervous about the visit, worried about meeting his employer and facing the inevitable questions and curiosity from people who'd known Thomas. But William's steady presence beside her made it easier. Marcus Brennan turned out to be a gruff but kind man in his 50s, with silver-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. His ranch house was impressive, built of solid timber with glass windows and a stone fireplace that dominated the main room. He greeted Abigail warmly, taking her hand in both of his. "Mrs. Kensington, Williams told me a lot about you. I'm glad you could make the trip. And please accept my condolences on your loss. I knew Thomas slightly, spoke with him a few times in town. He seemed like a good man." "Thank you, Mr. Brennan," Abigail said. "And thank you for the supplies and for letting William help me. I don't know what I would have done without it." "Nonsense," Brennan said gruffly. "That's what neighbors do. Besides, Will here was going to help you with or without my permission. Figured I might as well make it official and provide the materials." Dinner was a lively affair with a dozen ranch hands crowded around a long table, passing platters of roasted beef, potatoes, and vegetables. The men were polite and respectful to Abigail, though she caught several curious glances and a few knowing looks exchanged between them when they thought she wasn't watching. After the meal, William gave her a tour of the ranch while the others handled cleanup. The Triple Creek was impressive, with well-built barns, extensive corrals, and hundreds of cattle grazing on the surrounding hills. Abigail could see why William spoke of it with such pride. "Mr. Brennan has built something remarkable here," she said as they walked past a corral where several horses nickered and trotted over to investigate. "He has," William agreed, "but he'd be the first to tell you he didn't do it alone. His wife Sarah was his partner in every sense. She was the one who kept the books, managed the household, even helped with the branding. When she died 3 years ago, something went out of Marcus. He still runs the ranch well, but the heart's gone out of it for him." William stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. "Abigail, I know we haven't known each other long, but I need to tell you something. Working on your ranch these past weeks, talking with you every evening, it's made me realize what I've been missing. I enjoy your company more than I've enjoyed anyone's in a long time. You're smart and strong and capable, and I find myself looking forward to seeing you every day." Abigail's heart began to pound. "William, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," he assured her. "I know the timing is complicated. You're still grieving your husband. You're expecting his child. I'm not asking for anything except the chance to keep spending time with you, to keep helping with the ranch and getting to know you better. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, maybe we could see if this friendship might turn into something more." Abigail felt tears prick her eyes. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to admit that she'd been having similar feelings, that she looked forward to his visits with an anticipation that had nothing to do with the work he was doing. But another part of her held back, afraid of betraying Thomas's memory, afraid of moving too fast, afraid of getting hurt again. "I care about you too," she admitted quietly. "But I'm frightened, William. Everything feels so uncertain right now. I don't know if I can trust my feelings when my whole life is in such upheaval." William took her hand gently. "Then we'll take it slow. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people who enjoy each other's company, helping each other out and seeing where it leads. Can you accept that?" "Yes," Abigail whispered. "I can accept that." He lifted her hand and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles, the gesture both chaste and deeply romantic. "Good. Now let's get you home before it gets dark. I don't want you traveling these roads after sunset." The ride back to her homestead was quiet but comfortable, and when William helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. Abigail felt the warmth of his touch through her dress and wondered if he could hear how fast her heart was beating. October arrived with cooler temperatures and brilliant autumn colors painting the aspen groves gold. The work on Abigail's ranch was nearly complete, with all the major repairs finished and winter preparations well underway. William had helped her store hay in the barn, reinforce the chicken coop against predators, and even split enough firewood to last through the coldest months. But the evenings spent together had become the highlight of both their days. They would sit by the fireplace in Abigail's small parlor, William reading aloud from books he borrowed from Mr. Brennan's library, while Abigail knitted tiny garments for the baby. Sometimes they would simply talk, sharing stories and dreams and comfortable silences. One evening in mid-October, William arrived looking troubled. Abigail knew him well enough now to recognize when something was bothering him. "What's wrong?" she asked as she served dinner. William sighed, running a hand through his hair. "There's been another robbery, this time at a ranch about 15 miles south of here. 3 men broke in during the night, tied up the family, and took everything of value including all their horses. The family wasn't hurt, thank God, but they're shaken up badly." Abigail felt cold fear slide down her spine. "Do they think it's the same gang that's been operating in the area?" Sheriff Morrison thinks so. "The descriptions match reports from other robberies. 3 men, all wearing bandanas over their faces, armed and dangerous. They seem to be targeting isolated ranches and homesteads, places where there aren't many people to fight back." "Places like mine," Abigail said quietly. William reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you, Abigail. I promise you that." "You can't stay here every night forever," she pointed out, though the thought of him leaving filled her with dread. "You have your own work at the Triple Creek." "Actually, I've been thinking about that." William hesitated, then continued. "Mr. Brennan suggested something the other day, and I've been trying to figure out how to bring it up with you. He said if I wanted to work your ranch instead of his, he'd understand. He could spare me, especially with winter coming when there's less work to do." Abigail stared at him. "William, I can't pay you wages like Mr. Brennan can." "I'm not asking for wages," William said firmly. "I'm asking for the chance to help you build something here, to be a real partner in making this ranch work. And before you say anything about charity, think about it practically. You need help, especially after the baby comes. I need a place to work toward having my own ranch someday. This could benefit both of us." "What are you suggesting exactly?" Abigail asked carefully. William took a deep breath. "I'm suggesting I move into the barn permanently as your ranch hand and partner. I'd handle the heavy labor, the cattle when you're ready to expand, the daily maintenance. You'd manage the household, the chickens, the garden, the finances. We'd be business partners, equal shares in everything the ranch produces." "Business partners," Abigail repeated, though she suspected they both knew that wasn't all William was proposing. "For now," William said, his gray-blue eyes intense. "And maybe, eventually, something more. When you're ready, if you're ready." Abigail looked down at their joined hands, her mind racing. It was a practical arrangement, one that made perfect sense for both of them. But it was also an enormous step, bringing William into her life and her home in a permanent way. She thought about the baby growing inside her, about the long winter ahead, about the very real danger from the gang operating in the area. She thought about William's kindness, his steady presence, the way he made her laugh and feel safe and less alone. "Yes," she said, looking up to meet his eyes. "Yes, let's do it. But I insist we draw up a proper agreement, something legal that protects both of us, and we'll share any profits equally, whatever the ranch produces." William's smile was brilliant. "Whatever you think is fair. I'll talk to the lawyer in town, have him draw up the papers." They went to Bonanza together the following Saturday, and the lawyer, a shrewd older man named Mr. Patterson, helped them draft an agreement that spelled out their partnership terms. William would provide labor and expertise. Abigail would provide the land and manage domestic operations, and all profits would be split equally between them. Mr. Patterson raised his eyebrows at the unusual arrangement, but said nothing judgmental, merely ensuring all the legal language was proper. Word spread quickly through the small town that the widow Kensington had taken on a partner, and Abigail endured more than a few disapproving looks from the women at church the next Sunday. But she held her head high, William steady and supportive beside her, and refused to feel ashamed of a sensible business arrangement. Mrs. Hartwell, the minister's wife and the most influential woman in the congregation, stopped Abigail after the service. "My dear, are you certain this is appropriate? A young man living on your property while you're in such a delicate condition. People will talk." "Let them talk," Abigail said firmly, echoing William's words from weeks ago. "Mr. Ashford is helping me survive the winter and keep my ranch running. There's nothing inappropriate about it, and I won't apologize for doing what's necessary." To her surprise, Mrs. Hartwell smiled. "Good for you, dear. I had to make sure you were doing this with your eyes open, not out of desperation. But if you're confident in your decision, then you have my support, and I'll make sure the other ladies understand that this is a respectable business arrangement." William moved his belongings from the Triple Creek bunkhouse to Abigail's barn the following week. Mr. Brennan gave him a generous severance payment and an open invitation to return if things didn't work out, though both men seemed confident they would. Danny and several other Triple Creek hands helped William fix up a corner of the barn into comfortable living quarters, with a real bed, a stove for heat, and even a small bookshelf for the volumes he'd accumulated. "This is nicer than the bunkhouse," Danny joked as they hammered the last boards into place. "You've got privacy, decent food from Mrs. Kensington, and no one snoring in the bunk next to you. I'd say you're moving up in the world." William laughed, but his eyes sought Abigail where she stood watching from the barn door, and the look they exchanged was full of unspoken promise. With William living on the property full-time, the ranch began to transform. He rose before dawn each day to tend the animals and handle the morning chores, then would work on various improvement projects. He built a proper smokehouse for preserving meat, expanded the vegetable garden with plans for spring planting, and even constructed a small addition to the chicken coop that would serve as a root cellar. Abigail, meanwhile, threw herself into the domestic side of the operation. She preserved vegetables from the garden, churned butter, collected eggs, and cooked hearty meals that William devoured with flattering enthusiasm. As her pregnancy advanced, he took over more of the tasks that required bending and heavy lifting, but he never made her feel useless or incapable. They fell into an easy domesticity that felt almost like marriage, though they were careful to maintain propriety. William ate breakfast and dinner with Abigail in the house, but always returned to the barn to sleep. They worked side by side during the day, and in the evenings, they would sit together and talk about plans for the ranch's future. "I've been thinking we should consider getting some cattle come spring," William said one November evening as they reviewed their finances. "Nothing too ambitious at first, maybe 10 or 12 head. We've got enough grazing land, and if we're careful, we could build up a decent herd in a few years." "Can we afford it?" Abigail asked, studying the ledger where she'd been tracking every penny they spent and earned. "If we're frugal through the winter, yes. And I've been talking to some of the other ranchers about breeding stock. There's a man over in Leadville who's selling off part of his herd, good quality animals at fair prices." Abigail made a note in the ledger. "We'll need to build up the cash reserves first. I won't risk putting us in debt, not with the baby coming." "Agreed," William said. "We'll be conservative, build slowly. That's the smart way to do it." As November turned to December, the first real snowstorms arrived, blanketing the ranch in white and bringing the temperature down sharply. William had to break ice in the water troughs every morning, and Abigail was grateful for the firewood he'd stacked high against the house. Her pregnancy was becoming more difficult, with the baby taking up so much room she could barely breathe sometimes, and the cold made her joints ache. William was endlessly patient with her, taking over tasks she could no longer manage and never complaining about the extra work. He shoveled paths through the snow from the house to the barn and chicken coop, made sure the animals were protected from the worst of the cold, and even rigged up a system of ropes between the buildings so they wouldn't get lost in whiteout conditions. One particularly fierce storm rolled in just before Christmas, trapping them both inside for 3 days while the wind howled and snow piled up in massive drifts. William stayed in the house rather than risk the trip to the barn, sleeping on the floor near the fireplace with his bedroll. Abigail protested that he should take the bed, but he refused. "You're 8 months pregnant," he said firmly. "You need proper rest more than I do." They passed the time playing cards, reading, and talking. On Christmas Eve, William produced a small wrapped package from his coat pocket and handed it to Abigail with an almost shy expression. "It's not much," he said, "but I wanted you to have something." Inside was a delicate silver locket on a chain, the metal worked with an intricate pattern of flowers. Abigail gasped when she opened it and found a tiny photograph inside, one of her and William that had been taken in town by the traveling photographer who'd passed through in November. "When did you have this made?" she asked, tears filling her eyes. "The photographer still had the negative," William explained. "I had him make a print and commission the locket from the silversmith. I thought you might like to have it to remember this time." "As if I could forget," Abigail whispered. She fastened the chain around her neck, the locket resting just above her heart. "Thank you, William. This is beautiful." She retrieved a package from the kitchen and handed it to him, suddenly nervous about her own gift. William unwrapped it carefully to reveal a pair of leather work gloves she'd made herself, stitched with painstaking care during the evenings while he'd been reading to her. "The old ones were falling apart," she said. "And I thought you might need new ones." William slipped them on, flexing his fingers to test the fit. "They're perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you, Abigail. This is the best Christmas gift I've received in years." They sat together by the fireplace as the storm raged outside, the house warm and cozy despite the weather. William took Abigail's hand and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance and listening to the wind. "I love you," William said suddenly, the words quiet but clear. "I know the timing is complicated, and I know we agreed to take things slow, but I can't keep pretending what I feel is just friendship. I love you, Abigail, I think I've loved you since the day you pointed that Winchester at me and showed me you were strong enough to defend what was yours." Abigail felt her breath catch. She'd known this moment was coming, had felt her own feelings growing stronger every day. But hearing the words spoken aloud made everything suddenly real and immediate. "I love you too," she admitted, turning to face him. "And I feel guilty about it sometimes, like I'm betraying Thomas's memory. But then I think about what Thomas would want for me, and I know he'd want me to be happy. He'd want our child to grow up with a father figure, someone strong and kind to look up to." William lifted his hand and gently cupped her face. "I can never replace Thomas, and I wouldn't try to. But I promise you, Abigail, I will love you and cherish you and work every day to be worthy of the trust you're placing in me. And that baby you're carrying. I'll love that child as if they were my own flesh and blood. I swear it." "I know you will," Abigail said, leaning into his touch. "You're a good man, William Ashford, the best man I've ever known besides Thomas." William leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted to, but Abigail didn't move. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise, sealing the understanding between them. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "When the baby comes and you've had time to recover," William said, stroking her hair back from her face, "I'd like to marry you. Properly, with the minister and the whole town as witnesses. I want everyone to know you're mine and I'm yours, and that we're building this life together." "Yes," Abigail said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you, William, whenever you think the time is right." They spent the rest of Christmas Eve wrapped in each other's arms, making quiet plans for the future and dreaming about what their life together might look like. The storm continued through Christmas Day, but inside the little house, Abigail and William were warm and happy and completely content. The baby came on a frigid night in mid-January during another snowstorm, as if determined to make its entrance as dramatic as possible. Abigail woke just after midnight with the first pains and she called out for William. He was at the house within minutes, his face pale but determined. "I'll ride for the doctor," he said, already pulling on his coat. "You'll do no such thing in this weather," Abigail gasped between contractions. "You'd freeze to death before you got halfway to town. We'll have to manage on our own." "Abigail, I don't know anything about delivering babies," William said, fear evident in his voice. "Neither do I," Abigail admitted, trying to smile despite the pain. "But women have been doing this since the beginning of time. We'll figure it out together." The next several hours were the longest of William's life. He helped Abigail to the bed, brought clean linens and hot water, and held her hand through the contractions that came harder and faster as the night wore on. Abigail tried to remember everything the doctor had told her during her one visit to town, and William followed her instructions with steady competence, despite his obvious anxiety. Just as dawn was breaking, painting the snow outside with shades of pink and gold, the baby finally arrived with a robust cry that filled the house. William, his hands shaking, wrapped the infant in a clean blanket and placed the child in Abigail's arms. "It's a boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A perfect, healthy boy." Abigail looked down at her son, this tiny person she and Thomas had created, and felt her heart overflow with love and grief and joy all tangled together. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, they were the same deep brown that Thomas's had been. "Samuel," she whispered. "His name is Samuel Thomas Kensington." William sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Abigail's shoulders, and together they looked at the baby. Samuel's tiny hand reached out and wrapped around William's finger with surprising strength, and William felt something shift and settle in his chest. "Hello, Samuel," he said softly. I'm going to take care of you and your mother, I promise. You'll never want for anything as long as I'm alive." As if understanding, Samuel stopped crying and gazed up at them with solemn eyes. The weeks after Samuel's birth were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. William took over all the ranch work completely, insisting that Abigail rest and focus on recovering and caring for the baby. He was patient with the sleepless nights when Samuel's cries echoed through the house, often taking the baby from Abigail and walking him around until he settled, so she could get a few precious hours of sleep. By late February, Abigail was feeling stronger and Samuel was thriving, growing plump and healthy on his mother's milk. The winter storms had eased, and signs of spring were beginning to appear. William had already started planning the spring planting and making arrangements to purchase the cattle he'd talked about. One sunny afternoon, in early March, William came into the house with a serious expression on his face. Abigail, who was nursing Samuel in the rocking chair by the fireplace, looked up with concern. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," William assured her, "but the sheriff was just here. They caught the gang that's been terrorizing the area. All 3 of them are in custody in Denver, awaiting trial." Abigail felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd been carrying for months. Thank God. How did they catch them? They got greedy, tried to rob a ranch that had more hands than they expected. There was a shootout, and 2 of the gang members were wounded. The 3rd one gave up without a fight when he realized they were outnumbered. William sat down across from her. "The point is, the danger is over. You're safe now." "We're safe," Abigail corrected gently. "All 3 of us." William smiled and reached over to stroke Samuel's downy head. "All 3 of us," he agreed. "Which brings me to something I wanted to discuss with you. Now that spring is coming and things are settling down, I think it's time we set a date for the wedding. If you're still willing to marry me, that is." "Of course I'm willing," Abigail said, shifting Samuel to her shoulder to burp him. "When were you thinking?" "What about Easter Sunday? It's early April this year, which gives us a month to prepare. The minister can perform the ceremony after the church service, and we could have a small celebration here at the ranch afterward. Nothing fancy, just our friends and neighbors." Abigail felt her heart flutter with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "That sounds perfect." "But William, are you sure about this? Taking on a wife and a baby that's not yours. Your life would be much simpler if you found a younger woman without complications." William got up and knelt beside the rocking chair, taking her free hand in both of his. "Abigail Kensington, you and Samuel are not complications. You're everything I want. I meant what I said at Christmas. I love you and I love this little boy as if he were my own. There's no one else I want and there never will be, so please say you'll be my wife." "Yes," Abigail said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The next month passed in a flurry of activity. Mrs. Hartwell and several other women from the church rallied around Abigail, helping her prepare for the wedding. They altered a beautiful blue dress that had belonged to Mrs. Hartwell's daughter, adding lace and ribbons until it was fit for a bride. William, meanwhile, worked with Danny and some of the other Triple Creek hands to make improvements to the house, adding a proper bedroom for him and Abigail so Samuel could have his own small nursery. On Easter morning, the little church in Bonanza was filled with people who'd come to witness the wedding of Abigail Kensington and William Ashford. Abigail wore the blue dress with her blonde hair pinned up and adorned with spring wildflowers, and William stood at the altar in a new suit that made him look impossibly handsome. Mr. Brennan gave Abigail away, having offered to stand in for her deceased father, and Mrs. Hartwell held Samuel during the ceremony. The minister's words about love and commitment and partnership seemed to echo through the church as Abigail and William made their vows to each other. When the minister finally pronounced them husband and wife, William kissed Abigail with such tenderness that many of the women in attendance wiped tears from their eyes. Samuel chose that moment to let out a loud cry, and everyone laughed as Mrs. Hartwell brought him forward and placed him in William's arms. "Looks like he approves," William said, grinning as Samuel immediately calmed down and looked up at him with wide eyes. The celebration afterward at the ranch was everything Abigail had hoped for. Neighbors brought food and well wishes. Musicians played fiddles and guitars, and children ran around the yard while their parents danced and laughed. Mr. Brennan gave a toast praising William's character and Abigail's strength, and Danny made everyone laugh with stories of William's early days at the Triple Creek, when he'd been thrown from horses and trampled by ornery cattle. As the sun began to set and the guests started heading home, William and Abigail stood on their porch watching the last wagons disappear down the road. Samuel was asleep in Abigail's arms, exhausted from all the attention. "Happy?" William asked, wrapping his arm around his wife's waist. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again," Abigail admitted. 6 months ago I was alone and terrified, pointing a rifle at 6 riders and wondering if my life was about to end. And now look at us, a family. All because I dropped my reins first, William said with a smile. "Best decision I ever made." They went inside together, putting Samuel down in his new nursery before retiring to their own room. That night, they became husband and wife in every sense, their union tender and passionate and full of the love that had been building between them for months. The years that followed were filled with hard work and simple joys. True to his word, William purchased cattle that spring, and the herd grew steadily under his careful management. Abigail proved to be a natural rancher's wife, managing the household finances with skill and raising Samuel with a perfect balance of love and discipline. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic child who followed William everywhere, learning about ranching and horses and the land. He called William Papa from the time he could talk, and William never corrected him, loving the boy as completely as if they shared blood. 2 years after their wedding, Abigail gave birth to their first child together, a daughter they named Sarah after Mr. Brennan's late wife. The old rancher wept when they told him, honored by the gesture. Sarah had her mother's blonde hair and her father's gray-blue eyes, and Samuel was instantly devoted to his baby sister. 3 years later, another son arrived, whom they named Thomas William, honoring both Abigail's first husband and their own new life together. Young Thomas was quieter than his siblings, with a thoughtful nature and a talent for numbers that had Abigail declaring he'd be managing the ranch's books before he was 10. The ranch prospered beyond their early dreams. William's skill with cattle and his reputation for honest dealing made the Ashford Ranch respected throughout Colorado. They expanded their holdings gradually, purchasing adjacent land when it became available, until they had one of the most successful operations in the territory. But through all the success and growth, William and Abigail never forgot where they'd started. Every year on their anniversary, they would stand together in the spot where Abigail had first aimed her rifle at 6 riders, and William would take her hands and thank her for not shooting him that day. Samuel grew into a fine young man who eventually took over the day-to-day operation of the ranch, allowing William and Abigail to step back and enjoy their later years. He married a school teacher from Denver, and they gave William and Abigail their first grandchildren. Sarah, with her independent spirit and sharp mind, shocked everyone by becoming one of the first women to attend university in Colorado, studying agriculture and animal husbandry. She returned to work alongside her brother, bringing new innovations to the ranch that increased its productivity even further. Thomas followed his childhood aptitude with numbers and became a banker in Bonanza, though he never lost his love for the ranch and spent every weekend helping his family. He married his childhood sweetheart and brought her to live in town, but their children spent every summer at the ranch, learning the same lessons their father and grandfather had taught. Mr. Brennan remained a close friend until his death at age 72, leaving a portion of his own ranch to William in recognition of their long friendship. Danny married one of the girls from town and started his own small ranch nearby, and the two families remained close, their children growing up together. On a warm summer evening many years later, William and Abigail sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray and their movements slower, but the love between them had only deepened with time. "You ever regret it?" Abigail asked, her hand in William's as they rocked gently in their chairs. Taking on a pregnant widow and all the complications that came with it. William turned to look at his wife of nearly 40 years, and his expression was full of such love that it made her breath catch even now. Not for a single moment. "You and Samuel and this life we've built together. It's everything I ever wanted and more than I ever dreamed possible. That day I dropped my reins and showed you I meant no harm was the day my real life began." Inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren playing while Sarah prepared dinner in the kitchen that had been expanded and modernized over the years. Samuel was in the barn with his own sons, teaching them about the horses the way William had once taught him. Thomas and his family would arrive tomorrow for their usual weekend visit. "We've been blessed," Abigail said softly. "I lost Thomas and it nearly broke me. But then you came along and helped me put the pieces back together. You gave me a life I never expected to have again." "We helped each other," William corrected gently. "You gave me purpose and a place to belong. You gave me a family and a home and a reason to work hard every day. Everything good in my life comes from you, Abigail." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, still holding hands the way they had on their wedding day. The ranch around them hummed with life and activity, 3 generations of their family making noise and memories in the home they'd built together from almost nothing. Samuel came out of the barn and waved to them before heading to his own house on the property, calling for his sons to hurry up. Sarah appeared in the doorway behind them, wiping her hands on her apron. "Dinner's ready," she announced. "And before you say anything, yes, I made Papa's favorite roast and your apple pie, Mama. Now come inside before it gets cold." William helped Abigail to her feet, and they walked into their house together, surrounded by the sounds of family and laughter and love. As they sat down to dinner with their daughter and grandchildren, William looked around the table and felt profound gratitude for the path his life had taken. It had all started with a desperate woman defending her homestead, and a cowboy who chose compassion over caution, who dropped his reins and opened his heart. From that unlikely beginning had grown something beautiful and lasting, a love story written in hard work and shared dreams and unwavering commitment. The meal was noisy and chaotic with children chattering, and Sarah trying to maintain some semblance of order. Abigail caught William's eye across the table, and they shared a smile that held decades of history and understanding. This was what they'd built together, not just a successful ranch, but a family full of love and joy, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. After dinner, while Sarah cleaned up and put the younger children to bed, William and Abigail returned to the porch. It had become their favorite place to spend quiet moments together, watching the land they'd worked so hard to cultivate and improve. "I was thinking," William said, pulling Abigail close against his side, Maybe we should take that trip we've been talking about. Go to San Francisco, see the ocean, stay in a fancy hotel for a week. Samuel can manage things here, and Sarah's more than capable of helping him." Abigail looked up at him in surprise. "Are you sure? You've never wanted to leave the ranch for more than a day or two." "I'm sure," William said. "We've earned it, and I want to have adventures with my wife while we still can. Besides, I want to buy you something special, something from one of those fancy stores in the city. A piece of jewelry or a new dress or whatever your heart desires." "My heart desires you," Abigail said, touching his weathered face with gentle fingers. "It always has, from the moment you dropped those reins and showed me I could trust you. Everything else has just been extra blessing." William kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then finally her lips, the kiss sweet and familiar after so many years. "Then let me give you this adventure, this small thing to show you how much you mean to me." "All right," Abigail agreed. "Let's go to San Francisco and see the ocean together. Let's have one more grand adventure before we're too old to enjoy it." They made the trip that fall, leaving the ranch in Samuel's capable hands and boarding a train that took them west through landscapes they'd never seen before. San Francisco amazed them both with its bustling streets and tall buildings, and the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean that seemed to stretch on forever. William bought Abigail a beautiful pearl necklace from a jeweler on Market Street, and she wore it to dinner at their hotel restaurant where they danced together for the first time in years. They walked along the beach hand in hand, collected shells, and marveled at the ships in the harbor. They attended a performance at a grand theater and ate food from restaurants serving cuisines they'd never tried before. But as wonderful as it all was, they were both glad to return home to Colorado, to their ranch and their family and the life they'd built together. The familiarity of their own bed, the sound of cattle lowing in the distance, the sight of the mountains against the sky, these were the things that truly made them happy. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life. William and Abigail watched their grandchildren grow and welcomed great-grandchildren into the family. The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's management, and both Sarah and Thomas contributed to its success in their own ways. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a massive celebration. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled every corner of the house and spilled out into the yard. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. The local newspaper sent a reporter to write a story about the Ashford Ranch and the couple who'd built it from almost nothing. William stood to give a speech as the sun set on that special day, Abigail at his side. He looked out at the sea of faces, all of them connected to him and Abigail through bonds of blood and love, and felt his throat tighten with emotion. 50 years ago, he began, his voice still strong despite his age. I was a cowboy tracking stolen horses when I came across a pregnant widow defending her homestead with a Winchester rifle. I could have ridden past, let someone else deal with her troubles. But something told me to stop, to drop my reins and show her I meant no harm. That decision changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. He turned to Abigail, taking both her hands in his. You gave me everything, my love. A home, a family, a purpose. You made me a better man than I ever would have been without you. These 50 years have been the greatest gift of my life, and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Abigail was crying now, and so were many of their children and grandchildren. And you saved me, she said, her voice trembling. You gave me hope when I had none left. You loved my son as your own and gave me more children and helped me build something lasting and good. I was so afraid that day, so desperate, and you showed me that there was still kindness in the world, still reasons to hope and dream and love. They kissed while their family applauded and cheered, and the celebration continued long into the night with stories and laughter, and the joy that comes from being surrounded by people you love. William lived to see his 82nd birthday, still sharp-minded and active despite his advanced age. He spent his final years teaching his great-grandchildren about ranching and horses, passing on the knowledge and skills he'd accumulated over a lifetime. When he finally passed peacefully in his sleep one spring morning, Abigail was beside him, holding his hand just as she had on their wedding day. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people from all over Colorado, testament to the respect and affection William had earned throughout his life. He was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch with a headstone that read, "William Ashford, beloved husband, father, and friend." He dropped his reins and found his home. Abigail lived another 5 years, staying active and involved with the ranch despite her age. She spent her time with her children and grandchildren, sharing stories of William and the early days of the ranch, ensuring that their history would be remembered and cherished. She wrote a journal for her descendants, documenting the journey from that desperate day when she'd aimed her rifle at 6 riders to the rich, full life she and William had created together. When Abigail finally passed at the age of 87, surrounded by her loving family, she was buried beside William on the hill. Her headstone read, "Abigail Ashford, beloved wife, mother, and matriarch. She aimed her rifle and found her heart." The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their descendants, each generation adding their own innovations while honoring the foundation that William and Abigail had built. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of how courage, compassion, and love could transform lives and create something beautiful from the most unlikely circumstances. The little house where they'd first shared meals and conversations was preserved as it had been, becoming a kind of museum for the family, a place where descendants could visit and feel connected to their history. The barn where William had slept those first months still stood, though it had been rebuilt and expanded many times. The spot where Abigail had aimed her rifle at 6 riders was marked with a simple plaque that read, "Here began a love story that built a legacy." On warm summer evenings, family members would gather on the porch where William and Abigail had spent so many quiet moments together, and they would look out over the land that had been nurtured and improved by 5 generations of Ashfords. They would tell the story of the pregnant widow and the cowboy who dropped his reins, and they would remember that the greatest things in life often begin with a single act of courage and kindness. The ranch that Abigail and William had built together stood as testament to what 2 people could accomplish when they worked together with love and determination. It was more than land and cattle and buildings. It was a living legacy of their love, a reminder that even in the hardest times, in the wildest places, hope could take root and grow into something magnificent. Their great-great-grandchildren still worked the land, still raised cattle and horses, still gathered for meals and celebrations in the house that had been expanded many times, but still retained its original heart. They honored the memory of William and Abigail not just with words but with actions, by treating each other with the same love and respect that had characterized their ancestors' marriage, by working hard and building something lasting, by remembering that family and home were worth fighting for. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right across the Colorado prairie, it almost seemed like you could hear echoes of laughter and conversation, the sounds of William reading aloud while Abigail knitted, the cry of a newborn baby, the celebration of a wedding, the quiet contentment of 2 people who had found in each other everything they'd ever needed. The story of Abigail and William Ashford became more than just family history. It became part of the fabric of Bonanza, Colorado itself. The town had grown over the decades from a small settlement into a thriving community, and the Ashford family had been instrumental in that growth. The bank that Thomas had worked at still bore his name, now run by his grandchildren. The church where William and Abigail had married had been rebuilt twice, but always in the same location, and their wedding was still mentioned in sermons about the power of love and commitment. The legacy they'd created reached far beyond their own family. The principles they'd lived by hard work, compassion, integrity, and mutual respect had influenced generations of people in the community. Young couples starting out would visit the Ashford Ranch to hear the story and gain inspiration for their own journeys. Families facing hard times would remember how Abigail had persevered through loss and difficulty, how William had chosen kindness over caution, and they would find the strength to keep going. The ranch itself had become one of the most successful operations in Colorado, shipping cattle all over the country and serving as a model for sustainable ranching practices. But it never lost its character as a family enterprise, a place where love and hard work were valued above profit, where the next generation was always being prepared to carry on the legacy. As the 20th century dawned and Colorado changed from wild frontier to settled state, the Ashford Ranch adapted and evolved while holding fast to its core values. They incorporated new technologies and techniques, but they never forgot the simple truth that William and Abigail had proven through their lives: that the best things in life come from dedication to family, commitment to the land, and the courage to love even when it seems impossible. The story that had begun with a pregnant widow defending her homestead and a cowboy who chose compassion had become a legend of the American West, a testament to the power of human connection and the possibility of finding love and purpose, even in the most challenging circumstances. It was a reminder that sometimes the best decisions are made in a moment, that dropping your reins and showing trust can lead to extraordinary things, and that the greatest adventures often begin with a single act of courage. William and Abigail's love story lived on not just in the memories of their descendants, but in the very land they'd worked together, in the buildings they'd constructed, in the traditions they'd established, and in the example they'd set for what a true partnership could be. They had taken hardship and turned it into triumph, taken loneliness and transformed it into love, taken a struggling homestead and built it into a thriving legacy that would endure for generations to come. And so the story ends where it began, on a Colorado ranch with the mountains in the distance and the prairies stretching out in all directions. But instead of a desperate widow alone with a rifle, there was a family, strong and united, continuing the work that William and Abigail had started so many years ago. The rifle itself was preserved in a place of honor in the family home, a reminder of where it all began, but it was the love and dedication of that first couple that truly defined the Ashford legacy. They had aimed for survival and found love. They had worked for sustenance and built abundance. They had hoped for safety and created a sanctuary that would shelter generations. William Ashford had dropped his reins and found his purpose, and Abigail Kensington had lowered her rifle and opened her heart. And together, they had written a love story worthy of the wild, beautiful, challenging land they called home.